The transport ship spun wildly through space as Captain Jake Morrison fought with the controls. Sparks flew from the damaged navigation panel and warning lights flashed red across the cockpit. The ship had been traveling the outer rim trade routes when something went wrong with the jump drive. Now he was falling toward an unknown planet with no way to stop. Jake gripped the controls tight and tried to steady the ship as it entered the atmosphere. The hull screamed as it cut through the thick air and trees rushed up to meet him. He braced for impact just as everything went black. When Jake opened his eyes, he found himself floating in some kind of clear liquid inside a crystal chamber. Soft blue light pulsed around him, and he could breathe normally even though he was underwater. Strange insect-like creatures moved around the chamber, studying him with large compound eyes. They had thin bodies covered in pale green chitin and moved with quick jerky motions. One of the creatures pressed buttons on a panel and the liquid began to drain. Jake felt his feet touch the bottom of the chamber as the crystal walls slid open. The creatures stepped back and made clicking sounds to each other. Jake climbed out, slowly testing his body for injuries, but found none. "Welcome, stranger," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jake looked around and saw the largest of the creatures approaching. This one wore ornate robes and had golden patterns across its shell. "I am Dr. Hicks of the Valari. You have been in our healing chamber for 2 days." Jake tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Dr. Hicks offered him a cup of sweet liquid that tasted like honey. "Thank you," Jake said when he could talk again. "My ship crashed, and I thought I was dead." "Your injuries were severe," Dr. Hicks replied. "Broken bones, internal bleeding, and head trauma. But you healed faster than we have ever seen. Most remarkable." The other Valari gathered closer, clicking excitedly. Jake noticed they all seemed nervous but curious about him. "What is remarkable is that you are still alive," Dr. Hicks continued. "The crash should have killed any normal being." Before Jake could respond, the chamber doors opened and more Valari entered. These wore different robes and moved with obvious authority. The other Valari immediately bowed low as a figure entered that made Jake catch his breath. The newcomer was clearly female, though still insectoid like the others. She stood taller than the rest, with a crown of crystal spikes growing from her head. Her shell was deep purple with silver markings, and her 4 arms moved with graceful purpose. Most striking were her eyes, which held intelligence and wisdom that seemed almost human. "Your Majesty," Dr. Hicks said, bowing even lower. "The stranger has awakened." Queen Lyra studied Jake with those deep eyes. "So this is the creature from the metal ship," she said in a voice like music. "Tell me, stranger, what species are you and what brings you to Valera?" Jake stood straighter despite his confusion. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of Earth. I am human. My ship had a navigation failure and I crashed here by accident." The reaction was immediate. Every Valari in the room froze and their clicking stopped completely. Queen Lyra stepped closer, her eyes wide with what looked like amazement. "Human," she repeated the word carefully. "You claim to be human." "I am human," Jake said, wondering why this seemed so important. "Do you know of my people?" Queen Lyra exchanged glances with Dr. Hicks, who was trembling with excitement. "We have heard stories," she said slowly. "Tales told by traders and explorers from the far reaches of space. But we thought they were myths." Jake frowned. "What kind of stories?" "Stories of a species that never surrenders," Queen Lyra said, moving even closer. "Beings who grow stronger when threatened and can survive in any environment. Warriors who turn impossible defeats into victory through will alone. But these were just legends." "I am just a cargo hauler," Jake said, feeling uncomfortable with her intense stare. "Nothing special about that." Dr. Hicks made an excited clicking sound. "Your Majesty, his healing rate alone proves something extraordinary. And his bone density is 3 times normal. His muscle fibers are unlike anything we have studied." Queen Lyra nodded slowly. "Perhaps the legends were not so impossible after all." She gestured for Jake to follow her. "Come, human Jake Morrison. There is much we need to discuss." They walked through corridors carved from living crystal that pulsed with soft light. Jake saw Valari working with strange organic machines that seemed to grow rather than being built. Gardens filled with luminous plants provided both beauty and function as the Queen explained their biotechnology. "We have lived in peace for thousands of years," Queen Lyra said as they entered a vast chamber with a throne made from a single enormous crystal. "Our science focuses on growth and healing rather than destruction. We have never needed weapons or armies." Jake sensed something troubling in her tone. "That sounds wonderful, but I get the feeling something has changed." Queen Lyra nodded gravely. "The Dominion approaches. They are an empire that conquers worlds for resources. Their scouts have already been here mapping our defenses. They found none because we have none." "How long do you have?" Jake asked. "Days, perhaps a week," Queen Lyra said. "They sent a message demanding our surrender. When we refused, they promised to return with their full fleet. We cannot fight them, Jake Morrison. The Valari are not warriors." Jake looked around the beautiful chamber and thought about the gentle creatures who had healed him. "Maybe you do not need to be warriors," he said. "Sometimes the best defense is not what the enemy expects." Queen Lyra studied him with those wise eyes. "Is this the human way of thinking? To find hope where others see only defeat?" Jake smiled for the first time since waking up. "Your Majesty, that might be exactly what makes us human." Queen Lyra led Jake to a chamber deep beneath the palace where ancient archives glowed with stored knowledge. Thousands of crystal data nodes hung from the ceiling like frozen tears, each one containing information gathered across the galaxy. "For centuries our explorers have collected stories," Queen Lyra explained as she activated the archive system. "Tales that seemed too incredible to believe, but were too consistent to ignore." Holographic displays flickered to life, showing star maps dotted with markers. Jake watched as the Queen touched different points, making images and text appear in the air between them. The writing was in Valari script, but somehow Jake could understand it. "The first story came from the outer spiral," Queen Lyra said, pointing to a distant star. "Traders spoke of a species called humans who fought off pirates despite being outnumbered 20 to 1. The humans used tactics no one had seen before, turning their own ship into a weapon." More displays activated, showing different accounts. Jake read about humans who survived in the vacuum of space longer than should be possible. Humans who adapted to hostile environments within days. Humans who refused medical treatment that other species required because they healed too quickly. "Here," Queen Lyra said, highlighting another entry. "A merchant captain described humans as the only species that becomes more dangerous when cornered. He said they have something he called fighting spirit that spreads to other species around them." Jake studied the records, feeling strange about seeing his own kind described like mythical creatures. These stories are from all over the galaxy. How did information about humans spread so far? "That is what makes them remarkable," Queen Lyra replied. "Usually stories change as they spread, becoming less accurate with each telling. But these accounts from different worlds, separated by thousands of light years, all describe the same traits. Physical resilience, mental toughness, and most importantly, the refusal to give up." Dr. Hicks entered the chamber carrying more data crystals. "Your Majesty, I have completed the analysis of our guest. The results are extraordinary." Queen Lyra gestured for the doctor to continue. Jake felt uncomfortable being studied like a specimen, but understood their curiosity. "His cellular structure is unlike anything in our databases," Dr. Hicks said, activating his own displays. "His bones can withstand 3 times normal pressure. His muscles contain fibers that become stronger under stress rather than weaker. His brain shows neural pathways that suggest rapid adaptation to new situations." Jake looked at the medical scans showing his body in detail. "I just look like a regular human to me." "That may be the most remarkable thing of all," Queen Lyra said. "According to these legends, what you call regular is considered impossible by most of the galaxy." She activated another display showing a compilation of human descriptions from different worlds. Jake read accounts of humans lifting objects that should have crushed them. Humans thinking their way out of situations that trapped other species for days. Humans working together in ways that created solutions no individual could have found. "There is a pattern here," Queen Lyra said, studying the data. "Every account mentions that humans do not just survive impossible odds. They inspire other species to do the same. Traders report that after working with humans, their own crews became braver and more resourceful." Jake thought about his years hauling cargo across dangerous space lanes. He remembered crews of different species who had started nervous but ended up laughing and taking risks they would never have attempted alone. He had thought that was just normal teamwork. "Your Majesty," Dr. Hicks said hesitantly, "perhaps we should test some of these claims." Queen Lyra looked at Jake, who shrugged. "I am willing to help if it means protecting your people." They moved to a testing chamber where Valari scientists had prepared various challenges. Jake lifted weights that required 3 Valari working together. He solved puzzle boxes in minutes that typically took Valari hours. He adapted to breathing different gas mixtures without the technological aids the Valari required. But the most impressive test was psychological. The scientists created a simulation of impossible odds using holographic enemies that outnumbered Jake 100 to 1. Other species in the database had either fled immediately or frozen in panic. Jake studied the situation for 30 seconds, then began moving. He used the environment to his advantage, turning obstacles into weapons and traps. When direct confrontation was impossible, he found indirect approaches. Most importantly, he never stopped trying new tactics, even when previous attempts failed. "Fascinating," Queen Lyra said, watching the display. "Your brain activity shows no increase in panic responses. Instead, it becomes more focused under pressure." Jake finished the simulation, having survived far longer than any other species on record. "It was not that hard," he said. "You just have to keep thinking and never give up." Queen Lyra and Dr. Hicks exchanged meaningful looks. "Never give up," the Queen repeated. Those exact words appear in 17 different accounts of human behavior. A urgent chiming filled the chamber as communication alerts activated. Queen Lyra quickly accessed the incoming message, and her expression grew grave. "The Dominion scouts have returned," she announced. "They are broadcasting on all frequencies." The message appeared on the main display, showing a reptilian face with cold eyes and scarred features. "Valari insects," the creature hissed. "You have 3 of your days to prepare for total surrender. Gather your resources for transfer to Dominion control. Any resistance will result in complete extermination. This is your only warning." The transmission ended, leaving silence in the chamber. Queen Lyra turned to Jake with hope and desperation mixed in her expression. "So, human Jake Morrison," she said, "the legends claim your species never surrenders and inspires others to fight impossible odds. Are you willing to prove these stories true?" Jake looked around at the gentle Valari scientists who had saved his life and healed his wounds. He thought about the beautiful crystal city above and the peaceful people who had never hurt anyone. Then he smiled with the same expression that had been described in dozens of reports across the galaxy. "Your Majesty," he said, "let me show you what humans really do when someone threatens the people we care about." Jake stood in the central courtyard of the Crystal Palace, surrounded by 50 young Valari who had volunteered to fight. They looked eager but fragile with their thin limbs and delicate shells. Queen Lyra watched from a balcony above as Jake tried to figure out how to turn peaceful insects into warriors. "Listen carefully," Jake said, addressing the group. "You cannot fight the Dominion the way they expect you to fight. You are not built for direct combat, and that is actually an advantage." The volunteers clicked nervously among themselves. Their leader was a young Valari named Kex, who wore the robes of a crystal tender. "Human Jake, how can weakness be strength?" Kex asked. Jake picked up a piece of crystal from the ground and held it up. "This crystal looks fragile, but it can cut through metal if used correctly. The Dominion expects you to line up like traditional soldiers and try to match their firepower. Instead, we will do something they have never seen before." Over the next 2 days, Jake worked with the volunteers, learning their natural abilities. He discovered that Valari could change their shell color to match their surroundings, becoming nearly invisible. They could move through small spaces that would trap larger species. Most importantly, they could communicate silently over long distances using chemical signals. "Forget everything you know about warfare," Jake told them as they practiced in the crystal forests outside the city. "We are not going to defeat the Dominion army. We are going to make them defeat themselves." Jake taught them to think like the environment rather than like soldiers. Instead of carrying weapons, they learned to use the crystal formations as tools. Instead of armor, they relied on camouflage and speed. Instead of direct attacks, they planned traps and ambushes. "The key is patience," Jake explained as they set up their first practice ambush. "Let the enemy come to you on your terms, not theirs. Make them fight the planet itself." Queen Lyra joined the training sessions, watching Jake work with her people. She was amazed at how he adapted his teaching to Valari capabilities instead of forcing them to copy human tactics. "You are not trying to make them into humans," she observed during a break in training. "Humans are not the strongest or fastest species," Jake replied. "What makes us effective is that we adapt to work with what we have instead of wishing for what we do not have." While the volunteers trained, Jake worked on another project. His crashed ship was beyond repair, but some systems still functioned. He managed to restore the communication array and began broadcasting on emergency frequencies toward human space. Queen Lyra found him in the wreckage one evening as he fine-tuned the signal. "Do you expect rescue?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "Human space is too far away. Even if they received my signal and sent ships immediately, they would arrive weeks too late." "Then why send the message?" Queen Lyra asked. Jake continued working without looking up. "Because if something happens to me, there should be a record. Other humans should know that the Valari are good people worth knowing." Queen Lyra studied this strange alien who worked to help her people even knowing he might die in the attempt. "The legend spoke of human loyalty, but I did not understand what it meant until now." "Loyalty is not about expecting rewards," Jake said. "It is about doing what is right because it is right." The next morning brought bad news. Dominion ships appeared in orbit ahead of schedule, filling the sky with their dark hulls. The 3-day warning had been reduced to hours as the invasion fleet prepared for immediate assault. Jake gathered his volunteers in the crystal caves beneath the city. "The plan changes now," he announced. "We do not have time for perfect preparation, so we adapt to what we have." The young Valari looked scared but determined. Kex stepped forward, speaking for the group. "Human Jake, we trust you. Tell us what to do." Jake smiled at their courage. "Remember everything we practiced. The Dominion expects to conquer a defenseless world. Instead, they are going to fight an enemy they cannot see, cannot predict, and cannot understand." Queen Lyra arrived with disturbing intelligence from her remaining scouts. The Dominion is landing troops at 6 locations around the planet. They have heavy weapons and armored vehicles. Their commander is General Rex, who has conquered 47 worlds without a single defeat. Jake studied the tactical displays showing Dominion deployment patterns. "General Rex fights the same battle every time," he said after analyzing the data. "Overwhelming force applied directly to population centers. He has never faced guerrilla warfare." The plan Jake outlined was unlike anything the Valari had imagined. Instead of defending the city, they would let the Dominion occupy it while resistance fighters melted into the crystal forests. Instead of protecting resources, they would deny them to the enemy through sabotage and misdirection. "This requires perfect timing and communication," Jake explained. "Each team operates independently but coordinates through the chemical signal network. The enemy will think they are fighting random attacks, but actually every strike is part of a larger pattern." As the Dominion dropships descended, Jake made final preparations. He distributed equipment that combined human engineering with Valari biotechnology, creating tools the enemy had never encountered. Most importantly, he made sure every volunteer understood their role in the larger strategy. "Remember," Jake said as they prepared to move out, "we are not trying to destroy their army. We are trying to make General Rex make mistakes. Frustrated enemies do stupid things." Queen Lyra approached Jake as the volunteers dispersed to their positions. "Human Jake Morrison," she said formally. "Whatever happens today, the Valari will remember that one human showed us how to fight for our world." Jake checked his improvised weapons and equipment one last time. "Your Majesty," he replied, "today you are going to show the galaxy that peaceful people can be the most dangerous enemies when they fight for their homes." The first Dominion shuttles touched down in the Crystal Plaza as Jake and his team took their positions in the surrounding formations. Through his enhanced communication device, he could hear the other teams reporting ready from across the planet. General Rex emerged from his command shuttle expecting to receive immediate surrender from the terrified population. Instead, he found an empty city and an enemy that was about to teach him why humans had become legends throughout the galaxy. General Rex stood in the empty Crystal Plaza surrounded by his armored troops and heavy weapons. The silence bothered him more than resistance would have. In 47 conquered worlds, he had never seen a population simply vanish. "Scan for life signs," he ordered his lieutenant. "These insects are hiding somewhere." From his position in the crystal formations above the plaza, Jake watched through his improvised scope. The Dominion forces were exactly where he wanted them, concentrated in the open with no cover and no knowledge of the terrain. Jake activated his communication device, sending chemical signals that only Valari could detect. Across the planet, his teams received their orders and began the first phase of the attack. The initial strikes were subtle. Dominion vehicles found their fuel lines severed by crystal shards that seemed to grow from the ground itself. Communication arrays failed as bioluminescent plants released electromagnetic pulses. Weapons jammed when exposed to spores that corroded metal components. General Rex quickly realized he was facing organized resistance but could not locate the attackers. His thermal scanners showed nothing because Valari body temperature matched their surroundings. His motion detectors were useless because the planet itself seemed to be moving. "Sir," his lieutenant reported, "we are taking casualties but cannot identify targets. The enemy appears to be using the environment as a weapon." "Impossible," General Rex snarled. "Valari are passive creatures. They have no military capability." Jake smiled from his hiding place as he prepared the second phase. He had studied General Rex through captured Dominion databases and knew the commander was aggressive and impatient. Frustrated enemies make poor decisions. The next wave of attacks targeted Dominion psychology rather than equipment. Supply convoys found their routes blocked by crystal walls that grew overnight. Patrol units reported being watched by invisible enemies who left no trace. Most disturbing were the sounds that echoed through the crystal formations at night. Jake had taught the Valari to use their natural acoustics to create phantom noises that suggested large forces moving just out of sight. The Dominion soldiers grew nervous and began firing at shadows, wasting ammunition and revealing their positions. "They are trying to break our morale," General Rex announced to his officers. "Standard insurgency tactics. We will respond with overwhelming force." That was exactly what Jake hoped to hear. He sent new signals to his teams as the Dominion began using heavy weapons against suspected enemy positions. The crystal formations shattered beautifully, sending razor-sharp fragments in all directions, but the Valari were never where the explosions occurred. Queen Lyra monitored the battle from her hidden command center deep beneath the palace. She watched the tactical displays with amazement as Jake and her people turned every Dominion advantage into a disadvantage. "Your Majesty," Dr. Hicks reported from his mobile laboratory. "The human shows no signs of fatigue or stress despite fighting for 18 hours straight. His tactical decisions are becoming more creative under pressure." Queen Lyra nodded as she watched Jake coordinate 6 different ambush teams while personally leading an assault on a Dominion ammunition depot. The legends spoke of this. Humans become more dangerous the longer they fight. The turning point came when General Rex made his biggest mistake. Frustrated by invisible enemies and mounting losses, he ordered his forces to destroy the Crystal City itself. If he could not find the rebels, he would eliminate their hiding places. Jake had been waiting for this decision. As Dominion artillery began targeting the beautiful crystal structures, he activated his most devastating trap. The Valari had spent generations learning to grow and shape their crystal technology. Now they used that knowledge as a weapon. The crystals that the Dominion destroyed were connected to a vast network beneath the planet's surface. When they shattered, the network released stored energy in a chain reaction that turned the entire crystal forest into a massive electromagnetic pulse generator. Every piece of Dominion electronic equipment within 50 kilometers died instantly. Vehicles stopped working. Weapons powered down. Communication systems failed. Even their armor suits switched to manual backup systems. Now, Jake transmitted to all teams. Phase 3. The Valari emerged from hiding as the Dominion forces stood helpless with dead equipment. But instead of direct attacks, Jake had trained them for something more effective. They began systematically capturing Dominion soldiers using nets woven from crystal fibers and tranquilizer agents derived from local plants. General Rex found himself cut off from his command structure and surrounded by enemies he still could not see clearly. His remaining soldiers were being picked off one by opponents who seemed to materialize from the planet itself. "Show yourselves," he roared into the crystal formations. "Fight me directly, you cowards." Jake stepped out of the shadows 50 meters away from the general. His clothes were torn and he carried improvised weapons, but his eyes showed the determination that had become legendary across the galaxy. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of Earth," he announced in a voice that carried across the battlefield. "You threatened people under my protection. That was a mistake." General Rex stared at this single human who had somehow turned his certain victory into crushing defeat. "You are the one who organized this resistance. One alien against my entire army." "I am one human working with brave people defending their home," Jake corrected. "That makes all the difference." The general raised his sidearm but found it as dead as all his other equipment. Jake walked closer with weapons lowered but ready. "Your invasion is over, General," Jake said. "Your fleet in orbit lost contact with ground forces hours ago. Your soldiers are captured or scattered. You have two choices: surrender or keep fighting a battle you have already lost." General Rex looked around at his ruined army and the crystal formations that had become his enemy. For the first time in 47 conquests, he faced an opponent who had outfought him using tactics he could not understand. "What are you?" he asked Jake in genuine confusion. Jake smiled with the expression that had been described in countless reports across the galaxy. "I am what happens when someone threatens people I care about. The Valari call it the human difference." As if summoned by his words, Queen Lyra emerged from her own hiding place accompanied by 50 Valari warriors. She moved with regal dignity despite the battlefield chaos and addressed General Rex directly. "Dominion Commander," she said in her musical voice. "Your empire believed the Valari were defenseless. You were wrong. But more importantly, you made the mistake of threatening our people in front of a human." General Rex looked between Jake and the Queen, finally beginning to understand what had happened to his forces. "So the rumors were true," he said with something like awe in his voice. "You are the human legend." Queen Lyra stood before General Rex as the last of his soldiers were led away by Valari guards. The once mighty Dominion army had been reduced to scattered prisoners captured by a species they had dismissed as harmless insects. "So the rumors were true," Queen Lyra said, looking directly at Jake. "You are the human legend. But you are also something more." Before Jake could respond, new alerts chimed from the communication systems. Ships were entering the system, but their signatures were different from Dominion vessels. Jake recognized the energy patterns immediately. "Those are human ships," he said with surprise in his voice. "They actually got my message." The lead vessel established contact with the surface, broadcasting on frequencies that Jake had included in his distress signal. The voice that came through the speakers was crisp and professional. "This is Admiral Kate Cross of the Human Federation vessel Endurance. We received a distress call from Captain Jake Morrison. Please respond if you are receiving this transmission." Jake activated the communication array with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion. "Admiral Cross, this is Captain Morrison. The situation here has changed since I sent that signal." "Captain Morrison, thank God you are alive," Admiral Cross replied. "We have a rescue fleet standing by. What is your current status?" Jake looked around at the crystal battlefield where Valari teams were still processing Dominion prisoners. "Admiral, I am not sure rescue is the right word anymore. Within hours, the human fleet had established orbit and sent shuttles to the surface." Admiral Cross was a veteran officer with gray hair and sharp eyes who had seen combat in dozens of systems. She expected to find a human survivor in need of evacuation. Instead, she found Captain Jake Morrison standing beside an alien queen in the aftermath of a battle that had scattered an entire Dominion invasion force. "Captain Morrison," Admiral Cross said after Jake had briefed her on the situation. "Are you telling me that you and a group of untrained civilians defeated a Dominion army?" "The Valari defeated the Dominion," Jake corrected. "I just showed them how their natural abilities could be used tactically." Admiral Cross studied the tactical reports with professional interest. "Captain, these are not the actions of desperate civilians. This was a coordinated military campaign using advanced irregular warfare techniques." Queen Lyra approached the human officers with Dr. Hicks and several advisors. She moved with the dignity of a ruler, but also the confidence of someone who had just proven her people could defend themselves. "Admiral Cross," Queen Lyra said, "your Captain Morrison has shown us something we did not know about ourselves. The Valari have always been peaceful, but we learned today that peaceful does not mean defenseless." Admiral Cross looked between Jake and the Queen, trying to understand the relationship that had developed. "Your Majesty, I came here to retrieve one of our citizens. Instead, I find him integrated into your defense forces." "The integration was mutual," Queen Lyra replied. Captain Morrison taught us to fight, but we taught him about biotechnology and crystal engineering. The combination proved effective. Dr. Hicks activated displays showing the hybrid weapons and tools that had been developed during the battle. Human tactical thinking combined with Valari technology had created solutions neither species could have achieved alone. Remarkable, Admiral Cross said, studying the innovations. Captain Morrison, you have essentially created a new form of warfare. Jake felt uncomfortable with the attention. Admiral, I just helped people defend their homes. Any human would have done the same. That is exactly what makes this significant, Queen Lyra interjected. We have studied the legends about humans for decades. What makes your species remarkable is not that you are warriors, but that you help others discover their own strength. Admiral Cross was quiet for several minutes as she absorbed the implications. The Human Federation had been exploring the galaxy for centuries, seeking allies and trading partners. Most species they encountered were either too aggressive or too passive for meaningful cooperation. Your Majesty, Admiral Cross said finally, the Human Federation would be interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations with the Valari. Based on what I have seen here, we could learn much from each other. Queen Lyra nodded gracefully. We would welcome such relations, Admiral. But we have one condition. What condition? Admiral Cross asked. Queen Lyra looked at Jake, who was checking on wounded Valari volunteers. Captain Morrison must remain as our first human ambassador. He understands both species and has proven he can help us work together effectively. Jake looked up from his medical duties with surprise. Your Majesty, I am just a cargo hauler. I am not qualified to be a diplomat. Captain Morrison, Queen Lyra said with amusement in her musical voice. You organized the defense of an entire planet using resources no one knew existed. I think you can handle diplomatic relations. Admiral Cross smiled at Jake's expression. Captain, the Federation has been looking for people who can build bridges between species. Your service record shows transport experience across dozens of systems, and your recent actions demonstrate leadership under impossible conditions. Jake looked around at the Crystal City where Valari and humans were already working together to repair battle damage. Young Valari volunteers were teaching human engineers about biotechnology while human medics shared advanced trauma techniques. The integration is already happening naturally, he observed. Maybe formal diplomacy is just recognizing what has already begun. Over the following days, the details were worked out. The Dominion prisoners would be returned to their empire with a message that Valera was now under Human Federation protection. More importantly, the Valari would share their biotechnology in exchange for human manufacturing and defense coordination. Queen Lyra held a ceremony in the restored Crystal Palace to formalize the alliance. Jake stood beside Admiral Cross wearing the diplomatic uniform that felt strange after days of combat gear. Citizens of Valera and honored guests from Earth, Queen Lyra announced to the assembled crowd. Today we celebrate not just our victory over the Dominion, but our discovery of what becomes possible when different species work together. She turned to Jake with an expression of gratitude and respect. Captain Morrison came to our world by accident, but stayed by choice. He showed us that the legends about humans were not exaggerated, but were actually incomplete. The crowd of Valari and humans listened as she continued. The stories spoke of human courage and determination, but they missed the most important trait. Humans do not just refuse to surrender themselves. They inspire others to discover strength they never knew they possessed. Admiral Cross stepped forward to present Jake with his official appointment as ambassador. Captain Morrison, your actions here will be remembered throughout the Federation. You have proven that one human can change the fate of worlds. Jake accepted the appointment, but his attention was on the mixed crowd of species working together. Valari children played games with human crew members while their parents discussed technology transfers and cultural exchanges.